WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM's Master of Business Administration is designed to accommodate the career needs of professionals across a variety of work organizations. More information at business.udmercy.edu.
It's the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the program, state lawmakers are working on a new $80 billion state budget. We'll hear from the crew at Mishmash about what could be included.
But first, on the Metro, police are a big part of American public life. That's because many cities allocate anywhere from 25 to 40% of their budgets towards policing efforts. And that's not for nothing, as police are asked to do a lot. From traffic enforcement to resolving petty disputes to making arrests and referring individuals to different departments, officers are often first on the front lines when people are struggling. And for decades, people in Detroit and elsewhere have wanted police officers to look like the communities they're meant to serve. In Hamtramck, that's been happening. The city recently hired some Bosnian, Pakistani, and Arab officers. And yesterday, Hamtramck swore in its first Yemeni and Muslim police chief, Jamiel Altaheri. To talk about how he plans to run the department, he joins us now. Chief Altaheri, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Honored to be here. It's great to be at WDET 101.9, man. Great to be here.
All
Detroit.
right, so checks in the mail. We've got the ad read done, so thank you. But one thing I want to get into as we have you here is it's an interesting backstory, especially to have someone who's a native of New York like you are to make their way over here. So before we get into what your plans are here, can you just tell us why you chose to become an officer in the first place in New York?
It started really young. I think as a young kid growing up in New York City, I was watching all these officers. Also the cop shows, right?
I remember them well.
21
yes.
Jump Street and everything else like that. And it's something and also 9/11 happened, and that was when I was in college. And I think I felt like an obligation to really want to serve my country, but also my community. And I think there was a lot of backlash against Muslims at that time, misconceptions, misunderstandings. And I thought I could be that bridge, and it was an honor. And I think very grateful for the NYPD for the 20-year career from doing patrol to undercover work and investigative assignments and being a supervisor, moving up to the rank of commanding officer to a deputy inspector, and now have an opportunity to come here in Hamtramck.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring up 9/11 because in speaking with folks, I do know that seemed like for many like just a switch, right, in terms of how you were perceived in communities versus before and after. Some of the quotes I've heard from people are pretty, wild. But I just want to give you an opportunity to discuss that a little bit more because I can only imagine what the tension might have been like for you in the force, dealing with not only folks who look like you outside of the force who are questioning what you're doing, but also internally. So can you just let us know, for people who don't know, a little bit about that struggle, if that's something you experienced?
Yeah, I think we were. I do believe I think I'm Muslim American. Someone I was, grew up being proud to be an American, but Muslim. I see no conflict.
Right.
I think we were in a crossroads and also in a crossfire. I felt like, and I think it was an interesting time in my life where I was like, how can so-called Muslims do such an act which doesn't represent the religion of peace that I grew up in my home, in my community? So, but also I loved this country and also loved, as a young child, wanted to be a cop. And then I thought it was really, it was an opportunity to serve both my country and community at the same time. And I think it's important that Muslim voices are being heard, and that the larger public, larger United States, that they see Muslims as one of their own, not something different or alien, and that we truly are proud Americans. But our faith, it's not a wall or barrier. Yeah.
Well, New York's a really big city, and you talk a little bit about how you were working to kind of help bridge that gap. I think one of the things that may have allowed you to do that is the fact that you led the Equity and Inclusion Office at the police department. Can you tell us a little bit just about what your role and initiatives were there to try to help out with that?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, this was towards the end of my career, and I think some of the executives and leaders within the NYPD saw something in me that I can bring to the table and promote more an inclusive NYPD, but also make sure our officers, treat people in an inclusive manner, and that was important. That didn't only involve Muslim community; it was involved the African American community, the Hispanic, Latino community, as well as our LGBT community, which is very important that we bridge that gap between them, and that we create a lot of policy within the NYPD to make sure that our officers feel valued, that their issues, regardless of their sexual preferences, are being addressed in an appropriate manner, and that everyone everyone that enters the department as well as outside are being treated in a fair and inclusive manner. That's very important, I think, any organization, to make sure that we are, people are included, not excluded.
And when I think about you talking about the training, I think about education. What role does education play in that, in terms of just educating your officers about the different people that are in the community that they will be protecting and serving? Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think during earlier in the segment you said that it's good to have people that look like you, but I'm also a big fan of acting like you. It's not enough that we look like each other, but we should act appropriate. So I'm more focused on behavior. How do our officers act with their public, and making sure that they have the tools and set skills and knowledge of the community that they are serving, so that they can actually serve them more effectively, but also efficiently. So it's important to know like basic things. You're majority Muslim. Let's say in Hamtramck, you should know a little bit about the facets of Islam, maybe little things. What do you do when you go in the mosque? A little word. Same thing when you're in the Latino community. It's important to understand that culture, and it helps us do our job a lot better.
We're speaking with Police Chief Jamiel Altaheri, who just joined the Hamtramck Police Department as chief, coming from New York. And so that's my question for you next, Chief. Why Hamtramck?
Yeah, I got that question a lot. Even NYPD, they're like, Hamtramck? They're like, where's that at?
I mean, Hamtramck might fit into one of the skyscrapers that you have there, right, in comparison to size. So, but no, it is a real big size difference, big culture difference, but you chose to take that on. Why Hamtramck?
It's funny because I've been to Hamtramck about 12 years ago, and I used to run a soccer club in New York. So, I grew up playing basketball. Believe it or not, I was a point guard in my varsity team.
Oh, no, I believe it.
I was little Muggsy Bogues back in the day. But and there was these Yemeni kids from Yemen, the immigrant kids, which I'm from Yemen. My parents, and we moved out. So I was, I used to hear them playing a lot in front of my, house in the Bronx. So I was like, what are you guys doing? What are you guys always playing out here? Playing soccer? There's no soccer fields. So I met this guy who was a coach who came from Yemen, and we decided to make a Yemen United Soccer Club. And really, it was astonishing. Actually, we had about 10 teams. We had about over 300 members. And next thing you know, we're traveling to where? Hamtramck. And that was my introduction to Hamtramck. And I came here, and I met with some of the chiefs, and my deputy chief is here as well. Thank you for coming, brother. And we had, and then I met some of the officers there, the community. I was kind of amazed. I was like, wow, this is a pretty interesting little city here. Didn't have no real plans of coming back. And then one day the mayor calls me up, says, would you like to do a diversity training offer, our officers? I said, great. And that's how my early steps into Hamtramck and seeing how it was. But, I reached 20 years, retired, and I was thinking about doing something a little different. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity the mayor offered me as well, city council. And I think Hamtramck is no different than New York City. I think it's all one big, nation, maybe a little smaller in size, but I think Hamtramck has a big heart.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the mayor because in the Detroit Free Press, a local attorney has spoken about problems with policing Yemeni and Bangladeshi communities after he filed a 2016 lawsuit on behalf of Yemeni Americans for police abuse. And yesterday, the Hamtramck mayor had this to say during your swearing in.
There has been some misconception that the police is the enemy of the community. So we want to correct that misconception and prove that the police department is here to ensure your safety, not to punish you, but to protect you. And I am very glad to see how much we have come over the past 2 years.
Well, I'm hearing a bit of an acknowledgement of issues. So then if there are these issues, which you've been brought in to hopefully help fix, what issues have you seen and what are you planning to do to try to fix them?
Yeah, look, I don't see issues as a problem. I think it's an opportunity, and I think These are similar issues that maybe many cities, towns across America probably do face similar issues, and there's no issue that hard to fix. I think the issue is bringing everybody to the table, making sure that everyone's voice is heard. And that's where it comes down to.
All right. Well, speaking of voices being heard, you also mentioned interacting with the community. And, Hamtramck is known by many as the world in 2 square miles. And one of the reasons, we've been touching on it, all of these different cultures, all of these different languages. Is there a requirement, or do we have officers in Hamtramck that are trained to speak all of these languages? Or how do you plan to tackle that problem when issues with language can be a barrier for some?
Yeah, language is very important. I think something that in NYPD, which they've done very well in, is making sure that people's language are accessible and that we can communicate them effectively. Yeah, you have to know the language, culture, and I think we are hiring. We just recently hired a recent officer who speaks Bengali, and looking forward to hire another officer who speaks Arabic of Yemeni descent. So that's something we're working on. But also we don't necessarily need to have officers per se. We can also have people who are willing to work with the department, who can help us address those language issues, and that's something, it comes with a partnership between us and the community and addressing those issues together. At the end of the day, look, Sir Robert Peel, he wrote the 9 Principles of Policing, and one of the 9 principles was that the police and the public are one. And the reality is we can't do it. We can't do it alone. And I think working together collectively, police and the public, and addressing those issues and working together collaboratively.
Yeah.
This is not just the police working alone.
Yeah.
We work with the community, and
That's right. Police work is much different than military work, right?
Correct,
Like
yes.
You're talking about serving the community. It wouldn't work one way without folks being involved here. One thing that you brought up to make that happen, bringing people to the table. Do you have a plan? What does that look like, right? I can say I want to bring people to the table, but actually executing it, that could be a lot more
Correct.
difficult. How would you plan to do that?
So one of my first steps really is create a precinct, not precinct because this is more a smaller city setting, is really having a police community council that we can hold our officers also accountable, but also making sure the community has a voice through this council. So that's something I'm working on, creating that council. And then we set meetings that we do meet with community leaders, also working with me as my deputy chief, making sure that we implement some of these plans, but also engaging our youth. Explore program, something I'm very passionate about, sports, making sure that we're working on a cadet program within Hamtramck, as well as Explore program, which is for the younger kids. And we want to make sure that your interaction with the police shouldn't be a negative one. Why shouldn't the first interaction be a positive? And that's what we want to make sure, that we increase those positive interactions.
Chief, I'm hearing you talk about just, working with the community, getting with the kids, and just making sure you start young, especially when you're talking about those interactions and making them positive interactions when you start with kids and families. So just go into it a little bit more, the importance of community policing and being in the community with the people, and they can see your face and talk to you and interact with you, and that importance, once again, starting young and going all the way to the top so that people have that trust.
Yeah, and it comes down to being more engaged, and getting out those patrol cars, not just driving around, but actually get out and engaging our youngsters and going into the schools, the hospitals, and the local coffee shops like we did today. We went to a few coffee shops. Nice. And just being in people. People want to see you as human, not just when you're driving, maybe you miss a light or you make the wrong turn and you get pulled over. We want to increase those positive interactions. But hopefully, by creating that council, creating these set meetings that we have in plan, also being more transparent through Facebook, Twitter, and also and all the other social media platforms, engaging our youth in many ways possible, but also the larger community, and making sure that we're open to the public and we mean it, and not just words by action.
Well, wait, when you say being more transparent, I mean I want to know what you mean specifically about that, right? Like, are we talking about not knocking down FOIA requests for information or statistics about what's happening? What does transparency mean for you in this space?
For me, transparent, and just to be very honest, I'm living in Hamtramck.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I made a statement there to say, hey, I'm invested in this community too. I live here with you. It's not just me coming here for a job. No, I want to invest in the future of, especially when it comes to public safety. Transparent is meaning that every community person that lives in that city should know what crimes are occurring within their area. And that's also part of transparency, right? That information, the flow of information. Something happens, we let you know, we be advised. Obviously, if it's under investigation, we'll let you know. But just having that open dialogue when you can actually request information, get it. as long as it's not impeding any kind of investigation.
Yeah.
And we want people to not fear the police. That you can actually walk into a station house or the headquarters and ask for something and not be sent away without an explanation. So transparency is important.
Yeah. Well, we could keep you for the whole time. Actually, we couldn't because I see the deputy chief over there and he's packing. So,
I just want to get a shout out to
Andy.
Andy, thank you for coming here. He's been, great. One of the best deputy chiefs to have here. So thank you. Thank you.
Very good to know. Well, thank you as well. Hamtramck's new police chief, just sworn in yesterday, Chief Altaheri. Thanks again for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET, and coming up, we'll explore the ways white Americans have fought for the civil rights of Black Americans in Detroit. This is the Metro on 1019 WDET. I'm Nick Austin.
And I'm Tia Graham. In the fight for equality and safe spaces for Black Americans, it continues today. And as time marches on, it's clear that the fight has accomplished positive change. That change has come in part due to solidarity of like-minded activists. Our next guest has a new book discussing some of those allies, specifically white activists who fought for the civil rights movement here in Detroit. Say Bergen is a history professor at Dickinson College and the author of the book Organizing Your Own, The White Fight for Black Power in Detroit. In it, the professor argues that Black Power wasn't excluding white people, but rather encouraging white folks to organize white communities against racism. Here to discuss that now is Professor Bergen. Professor Bergen, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Why Detroit? Why focus on Detroit's civil rights history and white allyship here?
So Detroit is so special, right? I actually started working on Detroit when I was getting my PhD, and what I uncovered there was this sort of critical genealogy of anti-racism trainings. And it was that kind of window onto some of the kind of upper echelons of business society that kind of gave me first a view onto the grassroots. And so I started to see that there was this really enormously multiracial movement for Black self-determination in Detroit in the 1960s and 70s, and it just seemed like a very special piece of history.
Yeah, and history and just the looking back, especially at Detroit's history during the 60s, during the civil rights movement, you often think about the segregation of it all, and especially when we think about activism. And oftentimes you don't see the inclusion of white people in those spaces. So, in this book, in what way are you trying to talk about that? In what way are you trying to promote that?
Yeah, so the book is really trying to answer two questions. The first question is, how do we get to a point in the civil rights and Black Power movements when African American activists are asking something specific of white people, right? That they go into white communities and organize against racism there. And then the second question the book is really trying to answer is, okay, so how do white Detroiters specifically respond to that? When they say, okay, we're going to try something, what is it that they try, right? And what I found is that there is actually just this really large cross-section of white Detroiters who respond positively to that call from Black Power.
So let's dive into the history of civil rights in Detroit. What did some of the early Black organizing look like? And especially as we start to see the Black leaders go into the white communities and ask for help.
Yeah, so one of the first, or a couple of the first groups that I look at really is the Northern Student Movement and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They both have these really strong offices in Detroit, and they're both interracial as well. They're both Black-led at the Detroit level, particularly after 1964. And they're working on school segregation, they're working on school inequalities, and they're also working on police brutality in the city. And it's actually as a consequence of a real ramping up of police brutality, particularly on the near west side that we start to see Black activists say, actually, one of the things that white people need to do is start to organize against police brutality in white communities, because white people aren't believing that this is real, right? And so that's one of the first issues that people really start to work on, and Black leadership really sets the agenda in that way.
Mm-hmm. And when did white people in Detroit and elsewhere begin to organize as well? So we see the Black leaders starting to organize. We see the young people especially start to really mobilize, and they go into the communities. They're asking questions. What are some of the first things that we're seeing from the white communities when they say, oh, there is a problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So some of the first things that they're really trying to work on is, of course, police brutality. It's this huge issue. It's this really predominantly white force in Detroit at the time. And it has a really bad relationship with Black communities throughout Detroit, right? So between 1965 and really post the rebellion in 1967, that becomes the biggest focus for a lot of white groups. But another really big thing that white groups try to do is education, right? They see that sort of ignorance around race and around Black history in particular is a major barrier to getting white people to believe that racial inequalities are real and to do something about that. So we see all these white groups doing things like setting up freedom schools in the suburbs and setting up alternative curriculum and trying to get them into the public schools and agitating for the implementation of Black history at all levels of the public schools in Detroit and throughout Michigan, right? So policing and education are probably two of the biggest issues that white people initially try to build Black self-determination support for.
And I just think about, what we're going through in our society today, and still the fight for education and the fight for equality in education, especially as you talk about the city of Detroit. But, just moving along is not easy for people to organize in that way, and doing it often alienates, and it's a risk of backlash, and especially in the 60s, it's a risk of those weapons being turned right against them. So when I see this and I'm reading the book, I'm wondering if you can talk about the challenges that white people face when they were beginning to organize.
I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges was white people didn't have a roadmap, right? So they didn't have this long history of other white people trying to organize white people around racism. And so they were just sort of throwing things against the wall and seeing what stuck, right? So it was a real trial and error kind of effort. And that was the kind of biggest problem, right? Just trying to see what would work, what would move the needle with white people. I think another thing was just how polarized the city became after 1967. I think one of the things that I found most interesting was actually some of these white activists were actually really successful at getting white liberals and moderates to kind of change their minds a little bit. They'd get hundreds of people showing up for book clubs and other things like that. But the kind of strength of white conservatism in the city, particularly as it coalesced around the police department, it really grew from 68 afterwards, and that became a really big and often violent barrier for white and Black activists alike.
Mm-hmm. And, just based on history and the things that you've researched for the book, when did we start to see some of the Black activism and the work kind of die down, honestly, and start to kind of just float away? Yeah,
so obviously one of the biggest groups promoting Black power that was Black-led in the city was the League of Revolutionary Black Workers. It's a really powerful force both in the city and nationally in 1969, 1970, 1971. But a combination of lots of different things, including internal divisions and huge state repression, mean that we start to see it splintering by about 1971 or so. And so there is still a strong Black radical presence in the city, but it doesn't kind of congregate under the strong banner of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers like it had after 71.
Like it had. So Say Bergen is an author and a history professor at Dickinson College. We're chatting right now about her book, which is titled Organizing Your Own, The White Fight for Black Power in Detroit. And, we talked a little bit about it earlier, but it's often thought that Black or white people were excluded from these movements, were excluded from the fight for Black liberation in the city of Detroit. And, that's one thing that you talked about, is one of the things that you want to discuss is that it's not true. So if we can dive into that just a little bit more, the importance that, there was inclusion in terms of Black activism in the city of Detroit, and it was unique.
Yeah. So, We have this longstanding myth that part of what made Black Power was this idea that it was about closing ranks and racial exclusion, right, or a siloing in some kind of way. And oftentimes that myth has revolved around the idea that Stokely Carmichael comes along and he's so radical, he wants to kick white people out of the movement, particularly in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, right? And what I found was actually both in Detroit and around the country, there was a conversation that was really about where are white activists best placed, right? Is it really always the case that they should be going into Black communities and doing work there, or are they better placed doing other work, right? And so one of the things that I'm trying to argue in the book is not that there's this closing of ranks that happens, right, or an ideological basis for expelling white people from the movement, but that there was a new strategy that was being tried, right? So locally, this involved people like Wilbert McClendon and Frank Joyce, who are working with SNCC in the Northern Student Movement, trying to have this kind of series of debates and conversations about where are white people best placed in the movement? What's the best place tactically for them to be and the best work tactically for them to do, right? And it's out of this sort of series of conversations and people seeing the limitations of interracial organizing, which could often bring more violence, right? That they start to sort of see that there's a tactical innovation at hand here. We can start to ask white people to direct their energy elsewhere, and maybe in getting them to direct that energy elsewhere, we'll be able to grow a kind of white base of support for Black power. So it was this strategy, right? It's like, let's try something a little bit. We've been trying interracial organizing. We don't feel like we're getting very far, particularly in the segregated North. So let's try a little something different. And Detroit, I find anyways, is really one of the first cities to do that, right? To try this kind of parallel organizing, which I think is pretty amazing.
I think you talked about it being such a unique experience that happened here in the city of Detroit during the Civil Rights Movement in terms of integrating those the Black Power movements in different organizations and leaders. But my last question to you before I let you go is just about representation. And we talk about that often with Black people in TV, movies, news, whatever it may be. But I think about the book and I think about a white person reading the book and thinking, well, what is my place and my space in a Black Power movement or any movement right now, especially as we're talking about what's going on overseas, all the things that are happening overseas. So I just think of, the book, how would you adapt it to today and tell people today how to be allies?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is your place is always to listen, right? And so I think the idea that people who are most affected by issues should lead the fights around those issues is a lesson we should all take from Black Power. And when you think about yourself in relation to that, right, if you're not the most affected, then your place is to listen, right, and take some direction from people. But I think also there is this whole magical history of people not closing ranks, right, but saying, let's really think about where we're best placed. And I think thinking about that as strategy, right? Not as ideology. It's not about white people have no place in the struggle. It's about where do I fit best? Where can I be most impactful, right? And where can I work to sort of bolster the leadership of people most impacted by this, and put myself in the most kind of effective place, right? And I think that's really the kind of big lesson for white people in particular to take from the book, I hope.
Say Bergen is author and a history professor at Dickinson College. Professor Bergen has an artist talk this Thursday at Jam Handy in Detroit. What time is it?
6 p.m.
And that's at Jam Handy this Thursday. You don't want to miss it. The book is Organizing Your Own, The White Fight for Black Power in Detroit. Professor Bergen, thank you so much for being here with us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET, and coming up, we'll hear about what might go into Michigan's new state budget.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Nick Austin. And the Michigan House and Senate are creating their versions of the budget for the 2025 fiscal year. That budget is likely to be over $80 billion and could include things like housing initiatives and road funding tax. On Mishmash, WDET State Politics Podcast, Shana Roth and Gongwer's News Services' Alethea Casben spoke with each other about what might go into the budget and the politics that need to be negotiated to pass it.
The budget is incredibly important. I mean, this is how the state government is spending your tax dollars. So, Alethea, what are some of the things that stand out to you right now?
There are a few proposals that the legislature is spearheading that sticks out. So first, they're putting a lot of funding toward housing initiatives. This is an issue that lawmakers across the state are feeling. Between lack of housing and unaffordability, people are really struggling. Both chambers are also trying to get a pilot program off the ground to set up a mileage-based road funding tax. So this is a super early proposal, but the idea is you would pay road taxes based on how much you drive. The thought here is we need to replace the fuel tax we pay on gasoline because there are more electric vehicles and more just fuel-efficient vehicles on the road. So this is a very early step, and we all know how well the legislature has dealt with road funding in the past, so we'll see where this goes.
Super expeditiously, right? No, absolutely not. I am always looking for sticking points. What are the spots that you foresee both sides having some trouble?
So there are a couple of areas where the legislature has really veered off path from what Governor Gretchen Whitmer proposed earlier this year. So one of those is the community college tuition guarantee. This is a scholarship program that would provide, free tuition for community college students across the state. The House in particular has changed how this program would work and instead is looking to provide more funding for things outside of tuition. Think housing, childcare. The thought here is they want to get more community college students to go from part-time to full-time.
And that is a key proposal from the governor this year. Another is universal free preschool. The House and Senate proposals don't go so far as to provide free preschool for all 4-year-olds. Lawmakers are concerned the infrastructure isn't there classroom and staff-wise to truly provide free preschool for every 4-year-old.
Exactly. So there's certainly some negotiations happening between the administration and lawmakers, and that will continue through May and maybe some of June. So what do you think, Shana? Is this going to be a bipartisan budget this year?
I mean, it is an election year, so no, probably not. I mean, kidding, kind of. I mean, there may be some crossover, but I think overall, Dems are going to be looking for their own to vote yes on this. This could potentially be one of their last budgets to do this if they lose their trifecta majority. One significant sticking point for Republicans is the change to teacher retirement. A portion is fully funded, and Dems want to use that money for other things.
Yeah, and I think that's enough to get most Republicans to vote no.
That was Mishmash hosts Shana Roth and Gongwer News Services' Alethea Casben. The Michigan state budget takes effect October 1st. You can find Mishmash on WDET.org or wherever you find your podcasts.
This is the Metro on 101.9 WDET FM, and just want to let our listeners know what's one thing our grocery store should have. Thursday on the Metro, we'll be talking to Malik Yakini, food activist and board member at the Detroit People's Food Co-op. The Detroit People's Food Co-op is a Black-led and community-owned grocery store that recently opened in Detroit's North End neighborhood. The store provides customers with fresh produce and features products from local grocers and businesses. We want to hear from you. What's the one thing you think all grocery stores should have? Once again, we want to hear from you. What's one thing you think all grocery stores should have? Send us a voice memo on the WDET app. Just tap the microphone icon and leave your message there. However, a class action lawsuit filed in 1968 against Hamtramck was finally dismissed last month. The suit dealt with the displacement of a Black neighborhood so I-75 could be built. The settlement called for Hamtramck to build 200 housing units for displaced families in addition to senior housing. But because of the city's financial troubles, home construction took years to start and wasn't completed until last December. 59-year-old Didell Garrett's mother, was a lead plaintiff in the lawsuit. He began this conversation with WDET's Brianna Tinsley by discussing what it felt like to move to make way for I-75 as a kid.
You were just a kid when I-75 was built, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so do you remember having to move when your mom got the notice that it was time to pack up and go?
Yes, she did. She did tell me about them moving and how we end up to when we end up moving there, how we end up moving there.
How did that go about? Do you remember how did they offer her any money or anything to move?
No, they didn't offer them no money. Most of those a lot of them homes was owned by landlords. So we already know, even today, if you're a landlord, it's your property. You know, I can take the money and do what I have to do and just leave you with the problem of moving.
So what was it like for you and your mom during the case when it actually came about?
My mother was more worried about not just her. Being a loving person and caring for person, she felt like it wasn't just her that was being moved. It was a lot of other people being moved. And that was one of the things she really always strived, is helping other people throughout her life. So she was more wanting it to come together as everyone work and get something, young and old.
The house that you're in now, when did you move in and how did they contact you to tell you that the house was ready?
Well, me and the attorney, Bernhardt, always stayed in touch with my family. He remembered me as a little kid, and he always kept my mother, talked with him a lot, and she always made sure that she remind him of me. So when it came about, he called me. I was located in Flint, Michigan, and he called me one day, and he told me about the case that was moving forward. At that time, my mother had passed, and he didn't know. And so when I told him, he said, I will make sure you remember to take care of you and stuff. I'm sorry to hear about that at that time.
What year was that?
1999 to 2001.
Okay. And you finally moved into the house in 2001?
About 2001, yes, we moved. Me and my family moved into it.
Was the housing adequate?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was adequate. I mean, we still have problems with it and stuff, but I feel that what they did was okay. I mean, you can't satisfy everybody, you know, but some things they should have did more. And everything you're going to have fault. And some of the things they did was being on the timeline and trying to get them did it properly. They missed a lot of stuff on some of the houses.
That was Dwidell Garrett, a descendant of one of the families displaced by the construction of I-75 in Hamtramck. He spoke with WDET's Brianna Tinsley. Brianna's full story on the Hamtramck I-75 lawsuit is on WDET.org, and if you want to mention it, go ahead and mention it to a friend. It's right there, WDET.org. Now, Nick.
Yes?
We do have a conversation coming up about efficiency.
Well, yeah, efficiency is something that we all appreciate, and one of the things that I think we're trying to do is create more livable spaces, create more efficient spaces, and of course, this is for the benefit of the environment. It's one of the things that's the focus of the Inflation Reduction Act, which is funding a lot of money and not only startups, but also hopes to help create jobs here, create more efficient spaces, create more use of electricity.
Nick, I want a Jetsons future. So.
Well, I don't know if it's going to get you that far, but we can talk about some of the things happening in that space. And we've got two great guests to do it a little bit later on, talking about the things happening in Michigan Central, innovation in the world of tech. That's coming up as the Metro continues.
This is the Metro on 1019 WDET FM. Nick Austin is here, about to give you an amazing conversation. Just wanted to give you the weather forecast today. Partly cloudy with temperatures reaching a high around 70. We should see increased cloudiness through tomorrow with a slight chance of rain and a high around 72. And Thursday, we'll see it warming up a little bit, a high around 76 degrees. Friday, we'll see rain return with a high of 74. But right now at WDET, we see peaks of sunshine and 65 degrees.
Yeah, that is right. And, you know, good weather to be walking around in Michigan and Detroit proper. And one of the things you might see is Michigan Central Station. In fact, the recent announcement of the June 6th concert has many excited as it's going to open up. They want to see what the location looks like. And they want to know what it will mean for mobility and innovation in Corktown. But while tenants will have to wait another month before all the restaurants and retailers and others take occupancy in the station itself, the idea of Detroit and Michigan generally as an innovation hub has the eyes and ears of many, hoping that it can jumpstart the economy. One of the reasons why Inflation Reduction Act dollars, but another is, can Detroit become a hub of innovation using these dollars? To help us answer these questions and learn a little bit more about what the IRA is all about and what they're doing with the funds, we're joined by Evan Anderson and Jake Yurek, co-founders of Pearl Edison. Their Detroit business, which opened this year, aims to accelerate clean electrification, starting with heating and cooling, and they recently completed a home energy rebate pilot program for low-income homeowners using those IRA funds. Jake and Evan, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having us.
I'm happy to have you here also because I want to know exactly, what does Pearl Edison do?
Pearl Edison is a Detroit-based software company, and we help homeowners to buy an efficient heating and cooling system for their home from a really good contractor that's going to do quality work.
Okay, and so how do things like the IRA and the Inflation Reduction Act help with this?
Well, historically, lower income people have been priced out of investing in the energy efficiency of their homes, which is unfortunate because it's a trap around utility affordability. You can't afford to invest in efficiency, so your bills stay high, and you're left with less money after paying those important expenses. The Inflation Reduction Act is a pretty unprecedented investment in making these systems more affordable for people. So coming in October, there will actually be up to $14,000 available to subsidize an energy efficiency retrofit for a lower income Detroit family, and it's a really exciting thing.
When I was learning about the Inflation Reduction Act and specifically what the state hoped that would happen with these funds, they mentioned things like creating good-paying jobs, increasing domestic manufacturing, as well as lowering energy costs, which you're speaking about right now, and things like reducing air pollution. For you, in terms of, you mentioned being Detroit-based, what is it about? What have you seen? How will the IRA help with these goals in terms of the work that you guys been doing and in terms of incubation that you've seen over in, Michigan Central and with the people you've been working with?
Well, I'd say that one of the reasons I'm here in Detroit is because of Michigan Central and because Evan's an ardent Detroiter. Mm-hmm. I moved from Colorado when we started this business. And I think as we think about the IRA funds and what they can do for the broader ecosystem is lower utility bills for Detroiters and also improve the profitability of Detroit-based contracting businesses. We want to make sure that the best contractors get more work, and so these funds are going to help them do that.
Yeah, so you mentioned Detroit, for example, and having this ability with Michigan Central, but when I think of, you mentioned software, for example, I think of the coast. I think of, LA, Silicon Valley, not LA, but Silicon Valley, California, as well as the East Coast. Is Detroit set up to be a place that others like you would decide to go to Detroit and do this? And if so, why? What are you seeing that would make that happen?
Nick, we say all the time that if you wanted to build software for software companies or Facebook for dogs, the coast might be a great place to do that. But if you want to build things that matter more to people around the kitchen table that are making decisions about the major systems in their home or how they're going to get around at the end of the day, those are things that you want to be building in America's heartland. And we think Detroit is set up to really capitalize on that in no small part because of the really unprecedented investment that Michigan Central and others have made in kind of building out the ecosystem here.
So let's unpack that. What does that look like, right? Because we hear about Michigan Central a lot. People think of the station. I know that it's a district, so there's already business happening there. But then I also would think about the need for interacting with other people who are in that space or hiring up. One of the concerns we've heard about is there's not enough skilled laborers to do things on terms of jobs that you guys are looking for. What have you found in that space? Is this something that we can ramp up? Are there enough people? What are you seeing?
Well, I think that Michigan Central has a convening effect. We are working in a building with other entrepreneurs that are trying to build something, but it's really powerful when a state official who's running a program like this is right around the corner, or you can run into someone who's done something like this before and pick their brain. I think the convening effect makes it feel like everyone in that space is working towards similar goals, and everyone's kind of rowing the ship in the same direction.
Yeah. Well, I can't let you get out of here without telling me how I can save some money on my heating and cooling. So if we jump into this home energy rebate pilot program you were talking about, can you tell us a little bit about what you were aiming to do with that and what you found in this pilot program? What was it?
Well, I think something that was awesome was, everyone sees benefits from upgrading their HVAC system, whether it's improved comfort, reduced bills, better indoor air quality, air conditioning for the first time. I'll tell you my favorite story. I don't know if you all remember that January cold snap that we had here.
Yeah.
I had a home assessment scheduled for a Detroit senior not too far from Michigan Central. And it was 0 degrees when I got outside my car.
And you're trying to help them figure out how to have more efficient heating in their spot.
Yep.
Go ahead.
They filled out our onboarding process with our software. We were doing a final confirmatory check. The senior answered the door. She was shivering. It was cold. Still only 60 degrees in her living room. When I went down to the basement to check out the furnace, it was running full blast. The poorly designed system wasn't getting air where it needed to go in her house. And at the same time, it was running up her energy bills. So we redesigned the system, implemented it for her, and next winter, her bill should be a lot lower. And so I think that's the type of impact we're trying to have for folks in the community.
The rumor that I've heard, though, was that heat pumps, and is this what we're talking about mostly here, aren't as powerful. They're not as conducive for places like Michigan, where we have cold weather, as furnaces. Maybe if you're out west, you can do it. Am I mistaken about that? What's the misconception here?
It is a misconception largely. Heat pumps are really performant in cold weather now. It wasn't always the case. What is the case is that they're a little bit less efficient at very cold temperatures. So we will often include kind of a backup furnace or other heating source as part of that scope of work, just to be sure that if it gets really, really cold, that the customer won't see increased bills, which is a really important outcome. Just as climate is really an important outcome.
But then for what you're doing, you're working in the tech space, but you still got to get the guy to install it. You still got to check the ductwork to make sure all of that's working. How do you guys work, I guess, with those folks there? Because if you can ramp up or create a great idea, a great system, but if there's not the skilled talent or the talent you can rely on to implement it, it ain't going to work. So how do you work around that?
Yeah, you nailed it, Nick. We feel the skilled labor shortage as acutely as anyone, and there's definitely going to need to be a huge investment in training to ensure that there are enough folks ready to kind of meet the moment on cleaning up our grid in our homes. That being said, what we do is try to elevate the contractors that do excellent work, frankly, sometimes at the expense of those that don't, because what we're looking for is someone that is trained on all of the little things that are going to make the difference between higher bills and lower bills, and try to make sure that they're rewarded for that versus someone who might be better at sales but not so good at engineering.
Sure. So for people who, it does. And for people who want to learn more about what you guys are up to, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can find us at pearledison.com. Our software will help you to evaluate a more energy efficient heating and cooling system that can save you money, either leading up to warmer weather here in Detroit, or leading up to the implementation of the rebate programs later this year. That will make these systems much more affordable for
all right. Evan Anderson and Jake Yurek, co-founders of Pearl Edison. Thanks for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having us.
And that is the Metro. For Tuesday, March 14th, you can listen to recent episodes online at WDET.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
The show is produced by Sam Corey, David Lyons, Jack Philbrandt, and our engineer is Nate Bender.
The Metro is a production of WDET, a listener-supported service of Wayne State University. If you like what you hear and you want to support the Metro, consider becoming a member at WDET.org/donate.
This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.
Have a good one.
WDET is supported by the College of Business Administration at University of Detroit Mercy. UDM is offering a new master's degree in ethical leadership focused on sustainable, ethical, and inclusive problem solving. More information at business.udmercy.edu.